Snoop Dogg enters a luxurious restaurant in the heart of the city, dressed in simple baggy clothes, as if he had just come from an ordinary day. He chooses a discreet table, trying to go unnoticed, while the glow of crystal chandeliers illuminates the space around him. But before he even gets the chance to place his order, a waitress approaches with a look of disdain and an arrogant posture. "Are you sure you can afford to be here?" She snaps, her tone laced with irony, laugh enough for other patrons to hear. What happens next not only leaves everyone in the restaurant stunned, but also reveals a truth that changes everything. So before we continue this amazing story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The evening buzzed with elegance at Lumiere, a high-end restaurant nestled in the heart of Beverly Hills. Known for its polished interiors and impeccable service, the restaurant drew in the elite of the city: celebrities, business tycoons, and socialites who came for the ambiance as much as the food. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over the room, while gentle piano music floated in the background. Each table was adorned with pristine white linen and flickering candles, giving an aura of sophistication. Amidst this perfection stood Ashley, one of Lumiere's most experienced waitresses. She had worked at the restaurant for years, rising to be a trusted member of the team. Dressed impeccably in the restaurant's uniform, her hair tied in a neat bun, Ashley moved with a practiced grace. She knew the menu inside out and prided herself on her ability to cater to even the most demanding of patrons. But beneath her polished demeanor lay a streak of arrogance. Ashley saw herself as the gatekeeper of Lumiere's exclusivity. She often judged customers based on their attire and demeanor, forming snap opinions on who deserved the restaurant's upscale experience. For her, appearance was everything, and anyone who didn't fit her image of a Lumiere guest was met with thinly veiled disdain. That evening, Ashley glanced around the room, her sharp eyes scanning the impeccably dressed diners. A couple in designer suits whispered over a bottle of vintage wine. A group of executives shared laughs at a corner table. To Ashley, they were the kind of clientele that belonged here: refined, wealthy, and well-dressed. Satisfied with her domain, Ashley adjusted her apron and prepared for another seamless night, unaware that the evening would soon take an unexpected turn. The revolving glass door at the entrance of Lumiere spun slowly, and in walked a man who seemed completely out of place. Snoop Dogg strolled into the restaurant, dressed in his signature laid-back style: a baggy black hoodie with "The Dogfather" emblazoned on the front, loose jeans, spotless white sneakers, and oversized sunglasses. A gold chain glinted around his neck, catching the light as he moved. He carried himself with an effortless swagger, his every step calm and deliberate. Most of the restaurant's patrons didn't notice him at first, their attention still focused on their conversations and meals. The only sound that marked his arrival was the soft squeak of his sneakers against the polished marble floor. For someone who had dominated stages and screens, Snoop wasn't seeking attention. He moved with an understated coolness, as if he were just another guy dropping in for dinner. A faint smile played on his lips as he looked around the room, taking in the glittering chandeliers, the neatly arranged tables, and the sea of sharply dressed diners. A few staff members paused, eyes narrowing as they tried to place the familiar figure. Was it really him? Others simply went about their tasks, assuming he was just another visitor. Snoop took his time, scanning the restaurant with a calm, almost amused expression. If he noticed the stares, or the lack thereof, he didn't let it show. He approached the host stand where Ashley stood, ready to pounce. Ashley noticed him immediately, her sharp eyes narrowing as Snoop approached the host stand. She didn't need to hear his name to form an opinion. In her world, appearance spoke volumes, and to her, Snoop's casual outfit screamed out of place. With a perfectly arched eyebrow, she stepped forward, to meet him. "Good evening," she said, her tone polite but laced with a subtle condescension. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Snoop's smile didn't falter. He tilted his sunglasses slightly down his nose, looking her directly in the eyes. "Yeah, I'm sure. Heard y'all got some good food here. I'd like a table for one." His voice was calm, deep, and unmistakably his. Ashley blinked, momentarily thrown off by his confident reply. She recovered quickly, her professional mask slipping back into place. "Of course," she said, her voice clipped. "But just so you know, we're a fine dining establishment. Our menu and pricing might not be what you're expecting." Snoop chuckled softly, sliding his sunglasses back into place. "I think I'll manage." Ashley's smile tightened. She didn't like his calm demeanor. It made her feel like he was laughing at her. Without another word, she grabbed a menu and motioned toward the dining area. "Follow me," she said briskly, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she led him to the least desirable spot in the restaurant, a small table near the kitchen doors. She placed the menu on the table with a faint smirk. "Here you go. Your server will be with you shortly." Snoop nodded, unbothered. "Thanks," he said simply, sliding into the chair. He leaned back casually, taking in the view of the restaurant from his spot. Ashley walked away, already assuming he wouldn't last long. To her, he was just another guest who didn't belong. A few minutes passed, and Ashley reluctantly returned to Snoop's table, menu pad in hand. She kept her expression neutral, but the slight roll of her shoulders hinted at her annoyance. "Have you had a chance to look at the menu?" she asked, her tone overly sweet, almost sarcastic. Snoop glanced up at her, then back down at the menu. "Yeah, I'm good. Let me get the lobster ravioli and the house special cocktail," he said, closing the menu and handing it back to her with a relaxed smile. Ashley didn't move to take the menu right away. Instead, she crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that? The lobster ravioli is one of our premium dishes," she said, emphasizing the word premium. "And the cocktail, well, it's not your average drink." Snoop gave a small laugh and leaned forward slightly. "You're right, it's not. That's why I want it," he said smoothly. Ashley hesitated, trying to think of another way to challenge him. "All right, just so you know, we don't split the check," she said, her smile sharpening into a subtle jab. Snoop chuckled, unfazed. "Don't worry, I ain't splitting nothing. Just bring me what I asked for." The coolness in his voice made Ashley bite her tongue, though her irritation was clear in the way she snatched the menu and turned on her heel. As she walked away, she muttered under her breath, loud enough for the nearby table to hear, "Guess we'll see if he can afford it." Snoop leaned back in his chair, his hands resting on the table as he watched her retreat. He shook his head slightly, his amused smile still firmly in place. A couple of diners at nearby tables glanced at him, curious about the interaction but too polite to stare for long. For Snoop, it was just another day of being underestimated. For Ashley, it was the beginning of a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. Ashley returned to the floor, deliberately avoiding Snoop's table. Instead, she busied herself with other patrons, chatting warmly and laughing with them, her tone drastically different from the one she used with Snoop. She took her time delivering drinks and meals to other tables, letting his order sit in the kitchen longer than necessary. From his spot near the kitchen, Snoop could see her moving effortlessly across the room, smiling at every other guest. He didn't say anything. He just leaned back in his chair, his sunglasses still on, watching the scene unfold with an unbothered demeanor. Eventually, Ashley sauntered over to his table with his drink in hand. She placed it down with little care, the glass clinking loudly against the table. "Here's your cocktail," she said flatly. Snoop picked up the glass, inspecting it with a slight tilt of his head. "Appreciate it," he said, taking a slow sip. Ashley didn't move. Instead, she crossed her arms and gave a sly smirk. "So, you really like fancy places like this?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Snoop set his glass down and looked up at her, his expression calm but sharp. "What's not to like? Good food, good vibes. You got a problem with me being here?" Ashley blinked, caught off guard by the directness of his response. "No, not at all," she said quickly, though her tone betrayed her. "It's just, you don't seem like the typical Lumiere guest. That's all." Snoop smiled faintly. "Guess I'm breaking stereotypes tonight," he said, his voice smooth as ever. Ashley rolled her eyes slightly but didn't respond. Instead, she turned abruptly and walked back toward the kitchen. This time, a few nearby diners had noticed her attitude. Murmurs started to spread among the tables, but Snoop didn't seem to care. He leaned back in his chair again, sipping his cocktail, his calmness a sharp contrast to Ashley's growing irritation. It was clear to everyone watching that she was trying to provoke him, but Snoop wasn't giving her the reaction she wanted. The restaurant buzzed quietly with the sound of clinking glasses and muted conversations, but several diners began sneaking glances at Snoop's table. While Ashley had been dismissive and borderline rude, Snoop sat there like he had all the time in the world. He tapped his fingers lightly on the table to the rhythm of the piano music, occasionally taking a sip of his cocktail. His relaxed posture and calm aura seemed to make it impossible for anyone to rattle him. When Ashley finally brought out his lobster ravioli, she set the plate down with a bit more force than necessary, causing the utensils to clatter. "Here's your lobster ravioli," she said curtly. Snoop looked at the dish, then up at her, his smile unshaken. "Thanks, looks fire," he said, picking up his fork. Ashley lingered for a moment, as if expecting him to complain about something, but he didn't. Instead, he took a bite, closed his eyes, and nodded approvingly. "Yeah, that's hitting just right," he said, more to himself than to her. Ashley's lips pressed into a thin line, clearly annoyed that her efforts to provoke him weren't working. She glanced around, noticing that a few diners were watching her now, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. "Anything else?" she asked sharply. Snoop took a moment to chew, then wiped his mouth with the napkin and shook his head. "Nah, I'm good for now. You can do your thing," he said, waving her off casually. Ashley stormed away, her frustration evident in the stiff way she walked. Snoop continued eating, unbothered, even smiling faintly at the absurdity of the situation. Meanwhile, the diners who had been watching started whispering amongst themselves, their attention now divided between their meals and the unfolding drama. A couple at a nearby table exchanged glances, their expressions hinting at both sympathy for Snoop and disapproval of Ashley's behavior. Snoop finished his cocktail and signaled for a refill, his movements slow and deliberate. He wasn't about to let anyone or anything ruin his evening. If Ashley thought she could get under his skin, she was sorely mistaken. From across the dining room, an elderly man seated with his wife had been observing the situation closely. Dressed in a tailored gray suit with a red silk tie, he exuded a quiet sophistication. He watched as Ashley continued to prioritize other tables, leaving Snoop unattended for long stretches. His brow furrowed, and finally, he set down his glass of wine and stood. He walked slowly toward Snoop's table, his cane tapping softly on the marble floor. As he approached, Snoop noticed him and nodded politely. "Excuse me, young man," the elderly man began, his voice warm and steady. "I couldn't help but notice what's been going on here tonight. Are you being taken care of properly?" Snoop leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. "I'm all good, sir, but I appreciate you checking in," he said. The man glanced over his shoulder toward Ashley, who was chatting animatedly with another table, seemingly ignoring Snoop entirely. His frown deepened. "It doesn't look like you're being treated with the respect a guest deserves," he said, lowering his voice. Before Snoop could respond, Ashley appeared, her heels clicking against the floor as she approached the table. She wore a forced smile, but the tension in her body was clear. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her tone sharp as she glanced between the two men. The elderly man turned to her, his gaze calm but firm. "I was simply checking on this gentleman. It seems you've been rather inattentive." Ashley's smile faltered for a split second before she recovered. "I assure you, everything is under control," she said tightly. "Mr. She hesitated, realizing she still hadn't asked for Snoop's name. "Snoop," he said with an amused chuckle. "You can just call me Snoop." The elderly man raised an eyebrow at Ashley's obvious discomfort. "Well, miss, I suggest you ensure this gentleman receives the same service as everyone else here. After all, isn't that what this establishment prides itself on?" Ashley opened her mouth to respond, but quickly closed it, her face reddening slightly. "Of course," she said through gritted teeth. "I'll make sure he has everything he needs." "Good," the elderly man said with a polite nod. He turned back to Snoop. "Enjoy your meal, son." "Thank you, sir," Snoop replied, tipping an imaginary hat. The elderly man returned to his table, leaving Ashley standing there, fuming silently. Snoop picked up his fork and resumed eating, as calm and unbothered as ever. The interaction hadn't changed his mood, but for the rest of the diners, the tension in the air had become palpable. All eyes were on Ashley now, waiting to see what she would do next. Ashley stormed back to the server's station, her frustration barely contained. She avoided eye contact with the diners who had witnessed the exchange and busied herself by rearranging menus and silverware. But as the minutes ticked by, her irritation only grew. Finally, she returned to Snoop's table, her forced smile sharper than before. She stood there, arms crossed, as if waiting for him to acknowledge her. "Is everything to your liking?" she asked, her tone overly formal and dripping with sarcasm. Snoop glanced up from his plate, his expression as cool as ever. "Yeah, everything's real good. Y'all know how to cook here, that's for sure." Ashley pressed her lips together, clearly not pleased with his lack of reaction. "Well, I hope you're enjoying your spot," she said, glancing pointedly at the table near the bustling kitchen doors. "It's one of our more relaxed areas." Snoop chuckled softly, setting his fork down and leaning back in his chair. "It's got a good view," he said, his tone light, but with a hint of knowing humor. Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't back down. Instead, she raised her voice slightly, enough for the nearby tables to hear. "You know, most people who come here dress the part. It's nice to see someone breaking tradition," she said, her words dripping with mockery. The room grew quieter as more patrons tuned in, sensing the escalating tension. Whispers spread from table to table, and a few diners exchanged uncomfortable glances. Snoop didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, his sunglasses still on, and gave her a small smile. "You sure got a lot to say about how I'm dressed," he said calmly. "But last I checked, clothes don't make the man. The man makes the clothes." The subtle power in his words seemed to catch Ashley off guard, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "Well, I suppose it's not every day we see someone so casual in a place like this," she said, her voice louder now, ensuring even more diners could hear. A few murmurs of disapproval rippled through the room, not directed at Snoop, but at Ashley. Several patrons were visibly uncomfortable with her behavior, shifting in their seats or glancing toward the kitchen, wondering if someone would step in. Snoop, however, remained as composed as ever. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. "You done?" he asked, his tone still friendly but with an edge that silenced the room further. Ashley opened her mouth to respond, But before she could say another word, the restaurant manager appeared, his expression tight with concern. The restaurant manager, a sharply dressed man named Mr. Grant, approached the table with swift but controlled steps. His polished black shoes clicked softly on the marble floor, and his crisp suit seemed to amplify his authority. He had clearly noticed the growing tension and was determined to address it. "Ashley," he said firmly, his voice low but commanding. "May I have a word with you for a moment?" Ashley turned toward him, her posture stiff. "Of course, Mr. Grant," she said, her forced smile faltering. But before he could pull her aside, Mr. Grant's eyes landed on Snoop. His face immediately softened and a warm smile spread across his features. "Mr. Broaddus," he exclaimed, using Snoop's legal surname. "It's an honor to have you here with us tonight." The room seemed to collectively hold his breath. A few diners gasped quietly, while others exchanged wide-eyed looks. Ashley's jaw dropped slightly as she looked between Snoop and Mr. Grant. Confusion and disbelief etched across her face. Snoop leaned back in his chair, flashing his signature laid-back smile. "What's up, G? Just here trying to enjoy some good food, but it seems like not everyone's feeling my vibe." Mr. Grant's smile faltered as he glanced at Ashley, his expression hardening. "Is that so?" he asked, his tone clipped. Ashley stammered, her earlier confidence crumbling. I didn't realize—" "You didn't realize who you were speaking to?" Mr. Grant interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Broaddus is not only a valued guest, but he's also one of the owners of Lumiere." A stunned silence fell over the room. Ashley's face turned pale and her hands fidgeted nervously at her sides. "Wait, she started, but the words caught in her throat. "That's right," Mr. Grant confirmed. "And I would expect every guest, regardless of who they are, to be treated with the utmost respect. Something that, from what I've observed, has not been happening here tonight." Ashley's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The whispers in the dining room grew louder as patrons processed the revelation. Snoop remained calm, his demeanor unchanged. He looked at Mr. Grant and nodded. "Appreciate you, man," he said simply. Mr. Grant turned back to Ashley, his expression firm. "Ashley, we will discuss this further after your shift. For now, I'll be handling Mr. Broaddus's table personally. Please, step away." Ashley hesitated, but the weight of the moment left her no choice. "Yes, sir," she mumbled, avoiding eye contact with everyone as she walked briskly toward the kitchen. The dining room was now buzzing with murmurs, and all eyes were on Snoop, who simply smiled and shook his head slightly. "Ain't that something?" he muttered, taking another sip of his cocktail. As Mr. Grant prepared to assist Snoop personally, Snoop stood up from his seat, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. The quiet murmurs ceased almost instantly, leaving the restaurant eerily silent. He removed his sunglasses and looked around the dining room, his calm yet commanding presence filling the space. "Y'all mind if I say something real quick?" he asked, his smooth voice carrying effortlessly across the room. No one responded, but their attentive gazes said enough. Snoop began, his tone friendly but firm. "You know, I came here tonight because I heard this place had a good vibe. Good food, good service, all that. And most of y'all proved that right. But I gotta say, tonight wasn't exactly the kind of welcome I expected." He paused, letting his words sink in. Several diners exchanged guilty glances, clearly aware of the situation that had unfolded. "One thing my mama taught me," Snoop continued, his voice steady, "is that you don't judge a book by its cover. You don't treat nobody different just because they don't look how you think they should look. Everybody deserves respect, plain and simple." A few patrons nodded subtly, their faces thoughtful. Snoop glanced toward the kitchen doors where Ashley had disappeared, then back at the crowd. "We all make mistakes, but what matters is how we learn from them. This spot's supposed to be about bringing people together, no matter who they are or where they come from. That's what Lumiere's about, and we gotta hold ourselves to that standard." His words hung in the air, powerful and unpretentious. The tension in the room slowly began to ease as diners processed the lesson behind his calm yet impactful statement. Snoop nodded, his gaze sweeping over the crowd one last time. "That's all I wanted to say. Appreciate y'all for listening." He sat back down, the room still silent for a moment before a few patrons started clapping softly. The applause grew steadily, spreading across the dining room until nearly everyone joined in. Snoop simply smiled, acknowledging the gesture with a small wave before picking up his fork and resuming his meal, as if nothing had happened. The diners returned to their conversations, though the atmosphere remained more thoughtful than before. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted dramatically. The earlier tension was still palpable, but now there was a collective understanding that something had just transpired. A moment of clarity, perhaps. Some diners whispered amongst themselves, discussing Snoop's words, while others sat quietly, reflecting on how easily a small act of disrespect could escalate. A couple of tables exchanged glances, with one patron shaking his head and muttering, "I can't believe that happened." Another diner, a woman sitting alone at a corner table, lowered her voice. "He's right, though. No one should be treated like that." The air felt thick with contemplation. There was a slight unease among the staff, too. Many of them had witnessed Ashley's behavior, and now, with Snoop's words hanging in the air, they couldn't help but wonder how they might have acted differently. A few regulars, who had been dining at Lumiere for years, looked uncomfortable, their faces flushed with embarrassment. They knew they could have intervened earlier, but it had taken Snoop's intervention to break the silence. The entire room was now united in a quiet moment of reflection, unsure of how to continue, but all quietly acknowledging the gravity of the lesson that had just unfolded before them. After a brief pause, Mr. Grant stepped forward, his presence filling the space once more. He made his way over to Snoop, nodding respectfully. "I just wanted to express my deepest apologies for the behavior you've experienced here tonight," he said, his voice sincere. "This is certainly not the standard we hold ourselves to." Snoop looked up from his plate, meeting Mr. Grant's gaze. "I know it's not, but it's good to see you handle it. Appreciate you for stepping up." Mr. Grant gave a curt nod. "I'll be addressing this issue further with the team, but I'd like to assure you that this will not go unaddressed. You've made an important point tonight, and we'll be holding a staff meeting after hours to discuss how we can do better." Snoop nodded, his relaxed demeanor never wavering. "Good to hear, man. We all got room to grow, right? Just gotta keep it real." The manager turned back to Ashley's section. He then took a deep breath before addressing the rest of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for any discomfort tonight's incident may have caused. Please know, we will ensure this kind of situation doesn't happen again. And, as a gesture of our appreciation for your patience, your meals tonight are on the house." The announcement was met with a few murmurs of surprise, but also with a sense of relief. It was clear the situation had been handled with care, and the mood in the room lightened a little as the tension slowly began to dissipate. As the minutes passed, Ashley reappeared, her expression sheepish. She avoided eye contact with the patrons, keeping her head low as she moved to a section of the restaurant far from Snoop's table. She looked visibly rattled, her earlier bravado gone. Some of the diners who had witnessed the confrontation couldn't help but notice her reluctance to interact with anyone. The weight of what had happened seemed to hang over her, and the discomfort was evident in the way she carried herself. After a moment, Snoop stood again, catching Ashley's eye for just a second. Instead of confrontation, he gave her a simple, knowing look, a look that said there was no need to add to the tension. Ashley swallowed, her lips pressing into a tight line as she hurried to clear another table. She knew deep down that she had been caught in the wrong. The realization hit her harder than anything Snoop or Mr. Grant had said. The manager continued to oversee the dining room, ensuring everything went smoothly for the rest of the evening. As the night drew to a close, the once heavy atmosphere gradually returned to its usual rhythm. Diners finished their meals, exchanged pleasant goodbyes, and left the restaurant with a sense of resolution. Some patrons walked out still discussing the events of the night, while others simply enjoyed the moment of clarity Snoop's actions had brought. And as for Snoop, he finished his meal with the same laid-back composure he always had, the quiet leader of a moment that would linger in the minds of all who had witnessed it. After the room had settled, Snoop leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath and letting the weight of the evening roll off his shoulders. He looked around the dining room, catching the eyes of several patrons who had witnessed the exchange. Some smiled at him, their expressions now warmer than before, while others nodded in silent acknowledgement. Despite the drama, Snoop didn't seem at all bothered. His calm composure was a stark contrast to the intensity of the situation. He glanced out the large windows, looking at the Beverly Hills skyline and the passing cars, taking a moment to relax as though the evening had unfolded just as he expected. When the waiter returned to refill his drink, Snoop gave him a friendly nod. "Everything good with you, man?" he asked casually. The waiter smiled, clearly relieved by the shift in the mood. "Yes, Mr. Broadus. Thank you for, well, everything tonight." Snoop waved it off with a smile. "No need to thank me. Just keep it real with people, and everything works out, you know." The waiter nodded gratefully before walking away, leaving Snoop to reflect in peace. He wasn't concerned with the drama that had just unfolded. His focus was on how he had handled the situation, and on the message it sent to the people around him. His phone buzzed on the table, and he glanced at the screen. A new message from a friend. He tapped his phone to dismiss it, preferring the quiet for a few more moments before he would inevitably be greeted by fans and more attention. He wasn't done making an impact for the evening. As the night wound down, Snoop stood up once more, his movements slow and deliberate. The room was quieter now, but the air still felt thick with the weight of the earlier events. He knew the right moment had arrived to leave everyone with something to think about. With a gentle but firm voice, he spoke to the room again, his words flowing naturally. "All right, folks, before I head out, I just want to leave y'all with one last thing. Sometimes we don't know what someone's going through or what they've been through. You might see someone dressed a certain way or acting a certain way and think you got them all figured out. But we all got our stories, our struggles, and we all deserve respect." He paused, letting his words sink in, his eyes scanning the room slowly. "This place, Lumiere, is all about good vibes. It's about bringing people together, not tearing them down. I'm glad y'all got to see that tonight. So let's all keep that in mind, no matter where we go or who we meet." Snoop gave a nod, his gaze lingering on the patrons one last time. He smiled, a genuine, easy smile. "Stay cool, stay real, and treat people the way you want to be treated. That's the only way we can all win." With that, he walked toward the door, his presence lingering long after he had left. The room remained still for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air like a lingering melody. As Snoop left the restaurant, the murmurs of conversation slowly began to rise again. Some patrons remained silent, processing what they had just witnessed. Others began to speak in hushed tones, discussing the impact of Snoop's statement. "He's got a point," one diner said quietly to his companion. "I can't believe how it all played out. That guy was cool as hell about it." "I know, right?" another patron replied. "It's like he knew exactly what needed to happen. I don't think Ashley's going to be working here much longer." Despite the earlier discomfort, a sense of calm began to spread through the room. The diners who had been shocked or uncomfortable now seemed more at ease, reflecting on how easily a simple moment of disrespect could turn into something much bigger. The tension that had filled the air was finally dissipating, replaced by a quiet understanding. As the last of the evening's patrons finished their meals and began to leave, a new atmosphere settled in, one of respect and thoughtfulness, as Snoop's words had subtly changed the mood in the restaurant. Mr. Grant, who'd been silently observing the room throughout, finally took a deep breath and turned to his staff. He knew the evening wasn't over, but it had reached a crucial turning point. "All right, folks," he began, his voice carrying a tone of authority. "I'll be meeting with the team after hours to discuss tonight. What happened wasn't acceptable, and we'll make sure something like this never happens again." The staff nodded, many of them looking at each other uneasily. They had seen the way Ashley treated Snoop, and now they realized how far things had gone. "The goal tonight isn't just to fix the mistakes," Mr. Grant continued, "but to learn from them. We all need to make sure we're creating a welcoming environment for every guest, no exceptions. I'll see you all in the back in 30 minutes. With that, Mr. Grant excused himself and returned to the front, preparing to close out the night. But it was clear. Things would be different moving forward. The staff would have a lot to reflect on. As the restaurant slowly emptied out, the final moments of the evening felt different. The diners who had stayed until the very end exchanged polite goodbyes and left the establishment with a renewed sense of respect. Snoop's statement had left a lasting mark, not just on Ashley, but on everyone who had witnessed it. The energy in the restaurant had shifted from one of discomfort to one of understanding and accountability. Snoop's influence had extended beyond the walls of the restaurant, and even if he didn't fully realize it, his words had sparked something within the people who had been there. They would walk away, not just with a meal, but with a reminder about how we treat each other in this world, and how easy it is to create a better environment for everyone if we simply choose to be kind. And as for Snoop, he left Lumiere just as cool and composed as he had entered. No drama, no tension, just a quiet, impactful moment that spoke louder than anything else could. I hope you like this story. Subscribe Storyboat and turn notifications on, because we upload daily heartwarming stories like this.